Imagine this: the people closest to Jesus, his most trusted disciples, made some of the most shocking mistakes in history. These weren't just small, forgettable errors, they were monumental failures, the kind that would change the course of everything. Yes, these were men who had the privilege of walking side by side with the Son of God, yet they made decisions that not only shocked the world back then, but also continue to serve as warnings to us today. Let's start with Peter. The man who boldly declared that Jesus was the Messiah. He walked on water for a few steps, but his faith faltered when doubt crept in. He denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. Imagine the horror of knowing that your closest friend, the one you swore to protect, the one you said you'd never abandon, is being led to his death, and you turn your back on him. Peter's denial isn't just a moment of weakness, it's a symbol of the profound failure to live up to the promises we make to those we love, but it doesn't end there. Let's move on to Judas Iscariot. A name synonymous with betrayal. Judas didn't just make a mistake. He didn't just make a bad decision. No, Judas made a choice that would reverberate throughout the ages. He was one of Jesus' own. He knew him intimately, walked with him, ate with him, yet he betrayed Jesus for a bag of silver. 30 pieces of silver. Can you imagine the weight of that betrayal? To betray the Savior of the world for the equivalent of a few $100s today. Judas' story is one of the most tragic, showing how greed and disillusionment can cloud even the best of us. Then there's Thomas. Oh, Thomas. The disciple who doubted everything. He's become the poster child for skepticism, the guy who needed proof, even after the resurrection of Jesus. He wasn't just doubting the stories others told him, he demanded physical evidence, as if the miracles he had witnessed weren't enough. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe," Thomas said. But here's the twist: Thomas's disbelief didn't just hurt him. It also hurt the others who believed in Jesus' resurrection. His doubt, his refusal to trust, created division and conflict among the group. Jesus showed him mercy, but Thomas's moment of doubt will forever be remembered. Then there's the time when the disciples argued about who among them was the greatest. In the midst of following the Son of God, they were caught up in petty arguments about status. While Jesus was preparing to die for the sins of the world, they were debating who would sit at his right hand. Imagine being one of the disciples and realizing that in the most critical moments of Jesus' ministry, your mind wasn't focused on his mission, but on your own ambitions. This wasn't just a minor dispute, it was a glaring error in judgment that showed their lack of understanding of Jesus' true purpose. And remember when the disciples tried to stop children from approaching Jesus? They believed that Jesus had more important things to do than to interact with children. But what did Jesus do? He rebuked them and said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." The disciples didn't just misunderstand Jesus' mission. They missed a critical lesson in love, humility, and accessibility. The kingdom of heaven, it turns out, belongs to those who are humble, innocent, and trusting, just like children. In that moment, the disciples were caught up in their own perception of what was important, not in what Jesus truly valued. And then, there's the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus asked his disciples to stay awake and pray with him while he faced his most agonizing moment. He was about to be arrested, and he knew the suffering that awaited him. But what did his disciples do? They fell asleep. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Jesus came back to them each time, disappointed, but still full of love. This moment is a powerful reminder of human frailty. Here, we see how even the most loyal and devoted followers can falter when the weight of the world presses down on them. The disciples couldn't even stay awake and pray with their Savior in his hour of need. How often do we fail to be there for others when they need us the most? The mistakes didn't stop there. When Jesus was arrested, the disciples scattered. They abandoned him, each running in fear. They were not just terrified of what might happen to Jesus, they feared for their own lives. They failed to stand by him when it mattered the most. In that moment, the disciples were so consumed with their own survival that they couldn't focus on the mission they had been called to. The fear of the unknown overwhelmed them, and they chose to flee rather than face the difficult path ahead. This abandonment is one of the most painful moments in the Gospels, as it shows how fragile even the strongest faith can be when tested by fear. Now, let's talk about the disciples' obsession with power. After Jesus had risen from the dead, the disciples were still asking questions about who would be the greatest in his kingdom. In Acts 1, they asked, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" Even after all they had witnessed, all the teachings Jesus had given them, they still didn't understand his mission. They were focused on earthly power, not realizing that Jesus was talking about something far more profound, an eternal kingdom, a spiritual reign that transcended the physical. This misunderstanding highlights one of the biggest mistakes the disciples made, the failure to understand the true nature of Jesus' kingdom and the mission they had been entrusted with. Let's not forget about the time when James and John, the sons of Zebedee, requested to sit at Jesus' right and left in his glory. They wanted positions of power and honor in Jesus' kingdom. But Jesus responded with a profound lesson in humility. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. James and John's request wasn't just about ambition, it was about their misunderstanding of what greatness truly meant. They were still caught up in worldly definitions of power and status, failing to recognize that true greatness comes through service and sacrifice. Now, as we continue, let's take a moment to examine another failure, the disciples' misunderstanding of Jesus' mission. Time and time again, Jesus tried to explain to them that he came not to establish an earthly kingdom, but to save humanity from sin. Yet, they were stuck on the idea of a political and military leader who would overthrow Roman rule. They wanted the Messiah to be someone who would restore Israel's glory, someone who would lead them to victory over their enemies. But Jesus' mission was far greater than that. It was about eternal salvation, about a kingdom not of this world. One of the most significant errors the disciples made was their inability to see beyond their own limited understanding. Even when Jesus tried to prepare them for his death, they could not grasp the depth of what he was saying. In Matthew 16, when Jesus tells his disciples that he must suffer and die, Peter rebukes him, saying, "Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Jesus responds harshly, saying, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter's attempt to protect Jesus from suffering was rooted in his misunderstanding of the greater plan. He couldn't fathom the idea of Jesus suffering for the sake of others. In that moment, Peter failed to understand the necessity of Jesus' sacrifice, and in doing so, he missed the essence of what Jesus came to do. Let's not overlook the moment of betrayal. Judas Iscariot's decision to betray Jesus is one of the most tragic and devastating mistakes in the history of mankind. Judas had been with Jesus from the beginning. He was one of the 12. He had seen Jesus perform miracles, heard his teachings, and witnessed the compassion and love Jesus showed to everyone, even the outcasts of society. Yet, for 30 pieces of silver, Judas made the ultimate betrayal. He handed Jesus over to the religious authorities, leading to his arrest and crucifixion. Judas didn't just make a bad choice, he actively participated in the destruction of everything Jesus stood for. The gravity of his mistake is immeasurable, and the consequences of his actions echo throughout history. But let's pause here for a moment. What about the other disciples? Were they without fault? Of course not. Let's talk about their abandonment of Jesus in his darkest hour. As Jesus was arrested, the disciples scattered in fear. Peter, who had boldly declared he would never deny Jesus, followed from a distance, and when confronted, he denied Jesus 3 times. The rest of the disciples abandoned him in his hour of need. This moment reveals the fragility of human resolve. In the face of danger, fear can overpower even the most devoted followers. The disciples, who had walked with Jesus and seen his power, were not immune to fear. They were human, just like us. And in their moment of weakness, they ran. It's easy to judge the disciples, but let's remember that we, too, can make similar mistakes. When the pressures of life weigh us down, when fear grips our hearts, how do we respond? Do we stand firm in our faith, or do we flee? The disciples' abandonment of Jesus highlights the importance of staying faithful, even when circumstances seem insurmountable. They didn't just abandon Jesus, they abandoned their mission, their calling. But here's the amazing thing, despite their failures, Jesus didn't give up on them. He didn't cast them aside. After his resurrection, he appeared to them, forgave them, and restored their faith. Jesus saw the potential in his disciples, even after their biggest mistakes. The resurrection of Jesus was the turning point. It was the moment when everything changed for the disciples. They went from fearful, confused men who had scattered at the first sign of danger to bold, courageous leaders who would go on to spread the message of Jesus to the ends of the earth. But this transformation didn't happen overnight. It took time, it took forgiveness, and it took the disciples recognizing their mistakes and learning from them. The grace that Jesus extended to them after his resurrection was not just for their past failures, but for their future growth. The disciples' mistakes serve as powerful reminders for us today. They were human, just like us, and they made errors that we can learn from. They were chosen by Jesus, yet they didn't always understand his mission, and they didn't always follow him perfectly. But their journey was one of growth, redemption, and grace. Their failures were not the end of their story, they were the beginning of a new chapter. Jesus didn't leave them in their mistakes, he called them to something greater. And in doing so, he showed us the power of forgiveness, the importance of humility, and the need for perseverance. So, when you look at the mistakes of the disciples, don't just see their failures. See the lessons they learned, the grace they received, and the transformation that took place. Their story is not just about their errors, but about how they rose above them. It's about how Jesus took their brokenness and turned it into something beautiful, and here's the kicker, just as Jesus used these flawed disciples to change the world, he can use you too. Your mistakes don't define you. They don't determine your future. It's what you do after the fall that matters. Are you willing to get back up, learn from your mistakes, and keep moving forward? The disciples did, and look at the impact they had. If they can overcome their failures and become the foundation of the Christian faith, so can you. The 10 worst mistakes the disciples made weren't the end of their story, they were the beginning of something extraordinary. And the same can be true for you.